Hello and welcome to One Story, One Voice, your weekly online, live, in-depth interview with a prominent voice around a current story. Our guest today is singer and musician Vidya Shah, and we will discuss Songs for Change, brought to you by JSJC, Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, and simulcast on the university's YouTube and the Facebook page as well as its Twitter handle. Vidya's repertoire is vast, from Carnatic to Thumri, Dadra, Khayal, Ghazal. But Vidya's involvement with critical social issues is an important aspect, and that we will discuss today under extraordinary times. And she's also one of our finest music scholars. We shall touch upon that too. The global music industry, Vidya, is about 50 billion USD, of which 50% is estimated to be of live music. And over the last 3 months, 2.5, 3 months during the lockdown, it's estimated that more than 10 billion USD would have been affected in terms of global revenue or towards music, towards live music. What is the discussion amongst musicians? What is the direction ahead?
Kishla, thank you very much for inviting me to this session this evening. Thank you also because first off that you're giving me an opportunity to share some of my thoughts about this. But more importantly, there aren't too many conversations actually that are happening in the context of performing artists in this rather peculiar situation that we are suddenly hit with, and very drastically so. So. When you look at the kind of concerns that are being raised vis-a-vis the various communities that are suffering deeply and very sadly given the COVID crisis, somewhere along the line, if you see, there is no conversation about culture at all. So there have been some private efforts, where some artists have got together, set up some trusts and trying to raise some money for, communities of performing artists. But the challenge really is, which has been one even before the crisis, is to where to locate people like us. We are actually, if you see, we are a set of skilled entrepreneurs, but on our own. So we don't really belong to too many categories that lend themselves to any kind of, say, social security mechanisms or or a pension scheme or even a medical insurance. And these have been crises that the community has been struggling with even in the pre-COVID situation. So in the post, in the current scenario, not even the post yet, in the current scenario, the challenge is really quite grim. And there is a lot of conversation about how artists will find their feedback onto any stage, and how soon or how long that is going to take. And if that's not going to be something that can happen in the near future, then what are the alternatives that one can at least somewhat realistically, there are a lot of online opportunities that people are really running to, I would say, because at the end of the day, for an artist, for a performing artist, I think the most important thing is to be seen, to be heard, and to be able to share with one's audiences. And since that's not happening in auditorium spaces, we are having to look for alternatives which don't match in any which way with what it is that we do for a livelihood. I mean, so even though there are a lot of these online efforts that artists are doing, and practically every evening after 6 o'clock, you will see several artists coming on live on some kind of social media or the other. But it's going to be a while before we can think of some kind of a revenue model. Some kind of a model that will also generate revenue through these means if the auditorium is not going to be open for a while.
And Vidya, when we are talking about people going online and live streaming, that also means we are talking about a particular class or section of musicians who can access that worldwide. But we know that there is a large number of musicians who are called accompanists in Indian classical gharana. They actually are musicians. I mean, I am not very fond of the term accompanist, but I'm just trying to make sense of what, they don't have such access to go online and live stream. They don't have a market in that sense, and they are going to be very hard hit because they depended largely on government, cultural functions, on the Ministry of Culture events, and that's anyway was shrinking. I remember you telling me once how in Uttar Pradesh, a lot of these accompanying artists are losing business over the last 3-4 years.
There are several several issues here. It's not just, of course, like you rightly pointed out, there is the community, a large community of accompanying musicians, but then there are also other kinds of performers, folk artists, for example, and they form a very, very rich part of this cultural heritage of ours. Then there are other, sort of the extended part of a performance. There are technicians, people who do light, people who do sound, people, so there are different kinds of communities which are getting affected here, apart from, of course, the fact that a majority of them do not have access to put their work out online. But having said that, I mean, I'm still not sure if, just the online presence is, I think it's a temporary kind of relief for a whole lot of people from the community. But I think we have to really ask some very hard questions and find some reasonable answers so that, we can continue to take pride and celebrate, this rich cultural heritage that we tend to put on a pedestal otherwise.
You are a trained classical singer, but you also have the involvement with the poetry of change, poetry for change. The theme of today's show, for example, is Songs for Change. And, you have been deeply involved with civil rights issues, social issues. How does that intersect with your music? I mean, and, the reference, of course, is the acute misery that we have seen around the world, but particularly in our country over the last 2-3 months. How does that intersection happen?
I mean, I feel that historically music has always been an important catalyst, and it has music and poetry both lend themselves in a very natural, organic way to ideas which want change, so whether it is people's movements fighting big dams, or whether it is a migrant crisis, or whether it is a more serious citizenship issue, that probably everything, the first sort of natural thing that tends to happen around movements and around people coming together raising questions is to use a song or some powerful poetry. And this is not a new phenomenon by any stretch. I mean, we've seen this happen, in medieval times through the Bhakti and the Sufi movements, where you had the Bhakti saints, for example, Kabir, Namdev. I mean, there's a host of them who were questioning the idea of these social boundaries, these caste boundaries, through their metaphors, through their lyric, through the songs that they sang. And the idea was really to transgress these boundaries and make spirituality more accessible. But they were in the process raising political questions about Jat, about Mazhab, about if you have a Mirabai who's running away from her from a royal setting. I mean, I think what could be more feminist or more assertive, a more assertive expression of breaking away for a woman, and looking at this 400-500 years ago. So basically, the idea of music and poetry has always intersected with change, and which is why, when we were discussing what may be an interesting conversation to have when you suggested protest, I thought change is more encompassing, and change includes the idea of dissent, it includes the idea of resisting and protesting. But importantly, the fact is that poetry provides a medium for people to be able to express themselves. And it is, if nothing else, it's hugely therapeutic and cathartic in many ways.
Was there any song that was humming in your head over the last 2 months? Any particular song when you talk about songs for change? I mean,
So, well, I mean, very boringly, I only think musically, but I would like to sing a few lines actually, because um, the idea of celebrating the worker or the laborer is very central to a lot of the political, to a lot of the progressive poetry that has come up, especially mid 20th century onwards. Uh, bef- of course there were the progressive writers and all of that, but just in the context of movements. And there is this really powerful song which was which celebrates the worker, and in the current context of what is happening around us, especially with the migrants and the kind of terrible things that one is seeing every day. It's just so heartbreaking that maybe I'll sing a few lines just as a tribute, as a respect for. हाथ खुदा ली रे वो भैया, हाथ खुदा ली रे, हाथ खुदा ली रे वो भैया, हाथ खुदा ली रे। तेरे दम से ही धरती पर है हरियाली रे, हाथ खुदा ली रे भैया, हाथ खुदा ली रे। तेरे दम से ही धरती पर है हरियाली रे, हाथ खुदा ली रे भैया, हाथ खुदा ली रे। बोता है खेतों में जीवन तू ही तो हर साल, बोता है खेतों में जीवन तू ही तो हर साल। किंतु महाजन की गर्दन ने तुझको किया हलाल, दाब महाजन की गर्दन अब चर्बी वाली रे, हाथ खुदा ली रे भैया, हाथ खुदा ली रे, हाथ हथौड़ा रे भैया, हाथ हथौड़ा रे, and so on and so forth.
thanks so much, Vidya. Also, music suddenly becomes relevant. I mean, for example, everyone knows fairs, everyone loves fairs, but it was since last December when the Citizenship Amendment Act came and the youth of India were out in the streets, and they ushered in a new hope, and they again almost rediscovered fairs as an anthem of, you would say change, I was saying protest, but I think change is a much more beautiful word. We want them to bring change. How does that happen really? I know that there is no set answer to it, but I would.
You know how the whole fairs thing happened. I mean, the whole fairs thing was really an accident, I think, and it was really discovered, I think, for reasons that were perhaps not what the Nazm intended to say or do, but it was a happy accident. And I think a lot of people became aware of the fact that there were these poets, whether it was Faiz or Habib Jalib or all these people who were being sung at these protests, and brought in an interest and an awareness in the kind of poetry that the progressive writers put out very eloquently, especially in the early mid 20th century. And of course, Faiz Saab was one of the key people in this movement, in this muhim. And Hum Dekhenge perhaps is one of his most powerful, polemic poems that he had written. And what I find particularly useful, I'd say, is the relevance of some of these things and how they continue to exist through decades, through centuries. So whether it is a Kabir who's singing "Manna rangaye, rangaye jogi kapda," so if a Kabir Das is saying that, I don't see how it is not relevant today. And similarly, if जब भी वो कह के चले हम देखेंगे लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे. So the intent or the message is it continues to be beautifully relevant. And that's why I think young people also are attracted to it, and it's a good thing to, I think, you see, I think young people are, the good thing about a lot of youth today is the sheer diversity and the versatility of the music that they listen to, you know. So on the one hand, they may know, they may be hip hop or rap, which are also very political genres actually related, or and you know the interest with which they perhaps listen to, say, Kendrick Lamar or someone like that, they would now be able to listen to maybe Faiz Ahmed Faiz, someone singing Hum Dekhenge. So I think in that sense, poetry can be in a good place because of the kind of things that go around us, because of the kind of things that are going on around us. And like you rightly pointed out, therefore, those intersections continue to be very significant. And I think music makes that poetry even more powerful. So yeah, songs are important.
I mean,
Did I hear your question
your
right? Because actually I'm not, yeah. You're
yeah, I'm
slightly,
thinking, of
you know, a little weak. So I'm, I'm assuming you're asking me something actually.
Of course, your relationship with Faiz, of course, is also you know, with Nandita choosing Bol Ke Lab Azad Hai Tere in her film Manto, which was very interesting because Manto,
Right.
you know, was not very happy with Faiz, and yet Nandita thought that Faiz was going
Right,
to
yes.
start the Manto
It
film.
was a bit of an odd choice, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
I have
it,
to say though that my relationship with Faisab's poetry actually extends, you know, before I had this lovely opportunity to sing that Nazm in Nandita's film Manto. Sorry, because about 5, 6, or maybe 8 years ago, when it was Faisab's centenary year, I was invited by his daughter Salima Hashmi to perform at this space that they have created in his memory in Lahore, a place called Faiz Ghar, which is really a very, it's not a very big space, but it's a very endearing space because it has letters written by him, the poetry that he had handwritten, photographs. So, I mean, it really brings you closer to the man, and only iterates how charming he must have been. So, during his centenary year, Salima invited me to Lahore to sing at the Faiz Ghar, and it's very interesting. She said, "देखो ऐसा है कि ठीक है तुम फैज और गजल वगैरह गाती हो, पर तुम यहाँ पे हमें टुकड़ी दादरा और ख्याल उस तरह का कुछ क्लासिकल सुनाओ." फैज साहब को वो सब बहुत पसंद था. You should be singing something like that for us, which I thought was very sweet. And of course, I sang ख्याल, and then I did a whole sort of a classical music concert. And that also comes from, you know, it also made me realize that if you are in a democratic space, like we are here actually, then there has to be that freedom of being able to express. Because in Pakistan, it still is not common, or it's difficult there are hardly any practitioners of classical music, because there was a time when it was not possible for people to perform music. And therefore, people like legends like Iqbal Bano or Farida Khanum and these amazing singers took to the ghazal to actually bring alive years and years of taaleem, you know, all the learning that they had done, which they could not otherwise express through classical music concerts, which was not possible there. So they took to the ghazal, and a lot of what Faiz Saab has written, for example, lends itself. It's almost like he wrote for it to be sung by some of these legends, you know. So it made me feel, it made me realize that you know, music and the ability to be able to creatively express is so crucial. You know, it's almost like breathing an artist. And so it seems for a lot of people who enjoy the music or enjoy listening to music.
At this point, I'm going to also ask our audience on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter to please type in your questions. We have our backend and our research team who's going to pass me the questions on, and you know, I'm going to ask, put them to Vidya after a little while. But you know, Vidya, you can't not sing "Bol Ke Lab Azad Hai Tere" and you know, on this show, because I know that you went to Faiz's house and you sang Dadra and the Khayal, but out here we'd love to listen Faiz.
I can sing Bol Ke Lab or I can sing Hum Dekhenge, whatever you prefer.
I would love Bol Ke Lab Azad Hai Tere because the audience is not here; they are mute. So I'm taking the chance of pushing my preference over them.
Sure. बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल जुबान अब तक है तेरा, सुतबा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जब तक तेरी है, बोल 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 बोल, देख के आहंगर की दुकान में कुंड है शोले, सुर्ख है आहन, फूलने लगे फूलों के दहाने, फैला हर एक जंजीर का दामन, बोल के थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है, जिस्म जुबां की मौत से पहले, बोल के सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल जो कुछ कहना है कह ले, बोल जो कुछ कहना है कह ले.
Thanks, Vidya. Thanks so much. Vidya, also something that we were discussing when we were planning this show is that, that there, and I could be wrong, but there aren't too many classical singers actually who's kind of come to the streets in terms of songs for change. I mean, classical has still maintained a certain purity, as if you want to use that word. But how does one transgress? You use these words, the intersection of classical into what, say, for example, a rap or a jazz or blues. I mean, one of the finest definitions of blues I remember was, what is blues? A good man feeling bad. Now, a classical musician wouldn't define music that way. Do you think that this is a fair observation on classical musicians?
I think I'm going to defend my community on this one. Because while it's true that some of us are okay with sticking our neck out and looking at these intersections, considering possibilities of using music to provoke conversations, but if you look at the nature of this tradition, then we are deeply dependent on a patron, and especially classical musicians. The idea is to do your talim, is to do your riyaz, and to do your tayari, so that you can then present your skill or your creativity in front of an audience. Now, through history, we have seen there have been various emperors, nawabs, zamindars, who have bothered to nurture these traditions, and depending on what the king was interested in or what the ruler was interested in, you will see the extent of you will see the extent of research or the manner in which any tradition gets nurtured. Now, in the current context, all that is a bit mixed up because most of us are really leaning on the government for support, you know. And if you look at the kind of music that classical musicians practice, no corporate will want to even touch it. I mean, I'm going to say it in so many words. Maybe there are one or two, maybe like the ITC, which has set up a Sangeet Research Academy, or one or two such groups which bother with patronizing or supporting this kind of music. But largely, it's very restricted to what the government machinery decides through its institutions like the Sangeet Natak Academy and the Ministry of Culture and so on and so forth. So actually the spaces to look for intersections or to actually push the envelope, try something different, becomes a bit restricted. Working with other genres, yes, a lot of musicians are doing that. Working with jazz musicians or working with African musicians who do folk. So there have been many such crossovers, but I don't think that is necessarily done with the intention of looking at these intersections that you're talking about. I don't think a lot of musicians, for example, and I'm hoping that I'm not wrong here, that a lot of musicians who do bring their skill to the table in these kinds of experiments, if one were to call them that, don't necessarily look at a sociological or an anthropological or even an extensive cultural understanding of what it entails. So to that extent, it is a limited access, a limited sphere really that one is working within. Having said so, I would also say that if the state or if the government is the patron, then I think somewhere there has to be clear demarcation, that this is classical music and this is music for entertainment or this is popular music. Because of that kind of blurring also, there is a lot of confusion that happens. So for example, if you have a Ghazal festival, which is supported by the government in any city, in North India, it's not uncommon to have a Bollywood singer come to do the grand finale. Now, I mean, that really completely skews the whole situation because most classical musicians or most musicians who are trained in a certain form are looking for opportunities to perform, and therefore the space to negotiate is practically non-existent. Whereas a popular entertainer would have much more bargaining power, and in that context, a lot of us lose out, because then if at the end of the day it's only about pulling in crowds, then it defeats the purpose of what we want to celebrate as a certain kind of music. So what I'm trying to say here is that if there is that kind of assurance, if there is a certain kind of a safe space where you feel you can keep doing your music, but you can also engage with the questions that come with the music, then okay. But if you're only preoccupied as as a profession or as a livelihood thing, then where is the room to actually even look at these intersections?
I mean, just to repeat something that one of our members of the audience asks, Sabah Nagvi, my colleague, says that how does economic recession and no concerts impact classical music in the age where there is no patronage? I mean, you've touched upon it, but would you like to expand on it again?
I think a lot of us are terribly worried because any time, I mean, of course, now this is a very, very, it's an intense situation, but even otherwise, even in the past, the moment there is any talk about recession, one of the first things that gets seriously affected are these classical forms. So I am a musician, so I can talk about music, but I can say that it's not too different for the world of dance or theater, for that matter. So yes, in any kind of an economic crisis, somehow it seems like this can wait, whereas a lot of us have actually, brought our creative works towards nation building as well. I mean, and therefore I think the community needs to be also given its due in that regard. But it's going to be a very difficult task for us to convince a lot of people who can bother with patronizing.
Vidya, before I go on to take other questions, I want to actually touch upon the project which you were funded for, Women on Record, which lays out the evolution of music, how technology came. And I remember you saying that how these women, I mean, these are women actually, I mean, who ushered in change, Women on Record, and they would sing into, at a very high pitch, sing into a funnel shaped contraption which would get
That's
which
right.
would capture sound. And they were divas. And of course Gohar Jan, I think, was one of those. Can you tell us a little bit of Women on Record and Gohar Jan?
Sure. Um, See, this whole idea of change and how it manifests or how it presents itself through various ways. I think Women Record looks at a particular phenomenon in the early 20th century where when technology comes into the listening experience, how that changes, or how that really is the beginning of a music market, which redefines the gendered spaces in performance, which looks at new intersections of technology, gender, performance, sexuality, all of which was being marginalized in a certain way, uh, you know, especially with the whole colonial interpretation of morality and respectability in the context of performance. So the gramophone era, or the beginning, which is really the beginning of the early 20th century, changes that dynamic a little bit, because these very women, or the Baijis, or the singing ladies, who were stars of also the Mehfil space, now move into the studio space with the onset of the gramophone. And several of them are, they're fantastic entrepreneurs, and they're willing to take on this new crude technology and create a new commercial understanding of music. And this is the first time perhaps music gets sold in India, in the Indian market. So my project Women on Record is really an acknowledgement of that time, of that space, and of the Baijis who contributed to the making of this music market. Because initially, when the Gramophone and Typewriter Company comes to India with the task of setting up this market, it is when they're scouting for talent, it is these divas, it's these Baijis who they actually find and record. And like you rightly pointed out, they initially it's very crude, so they actually have to put their head into a wax horn and sing in higher pitches so that the sound gets absorbed in the wax that's layered inside inside this horn. So very different from the kind of traditional training and the kind of leisure that one enjoys when one thinks of classical music. But to transform that into this space of the 78 RPM was essentially done by a group of women. And Gohar Jan was the first one who was recorded commercially in the year 1902. And it's fascinating how she also, right from the beginning, controls the music scenario, the music label scenario, the recording scenario. And it's quite evident also in the way she not just presents her music on the record, but how she announces herself at the end of the record. There's a certain elan, there's a certain there's a certain respect that she commands in the way she announces herself at the end of the record. So this is the beginning of another shift that we see in the world of traditional music, because the record changes the dynamics, not just of the performance space, but also of the listening space. And although it was the women who initially contribute to this phenomenon, very soon they're marginalized, especially because of all that's going around the nationalist movement. Although many of them were very actively involved in the nationalist movement. Of course, we talk about Gohar Jan and how she contributed to the Indian National Congress, and there are many interesting stories around that. But there were also other musicians like Jadan Bai, for example, Nargis's mother, who supports the progressive writers. Some of them who actually set up production houses are making contributions to various groups. And Siddheshwari ji had the doyen of Tumri singing from Banaras. She actually has Vande Mataram embroidered on her sari. And we know that there were records which were there were record labels which were recording national songs, patriotic songs. In fact, there's a beautiful rendition of Vande Mataram by a legendary singer called Mogubai Kutikar, who was the mother of Kishori Amonkarji. So many interesting things are happening, which Women on Record is trying to acknowledge. It's really trying to put the women on record. The fact that there is very little that we know about them apart from names and discographies. So through performance, through exhibitions, through workshops, and even a website, we've tried to mainstream these voices, so that when you actually look at the social history of especially of North Indian classical music, there is adequate acknowledgement of the presence of this community.
Is there any favorites that you have, Vidya, from any of the women? I know that it's difficult to choose one, but you particularly have written more on Gauhar Jaan, I suppose. You have a separate book altogether on her. So, is there any couple of lines from there that you would like to?
Since we are doing Songs of Change, why don't I sing the Vande Mataram, if that's okay with you?
Okay, I mean,
I could sing a couple of lines of the Vande Mataram.
It has assumed different connotations, lately, but still, one can't deny the fact that it did usher in, it did mobilize the patriotic spirit, and it was a nationalistic song. But people may have different opinions.
Well, actually, that's precisely why I think we need to keep these connections intact. Because I think we should keep bringing back these conversations. Which is why history is important, so that these connections remain, and we do not have lopsided and skewed interpretations, which really miss the intent of what many people tried to say about such texts. Yeah. Vande Mataram Sujala Sufala Malaya Shitala Shashamala Mataram Jayavande Mataram. Of course, there are many songs which are very, very close to my heart, but then I think hopefully it will come on stage soon with the Women on Record performance.
Thanks,
You'll probably get to hear a wider cross section rather than.
Yeah.
You see, the thing about the project is, sorry, if I could just add one thing, that it looks at journeys within journeys. Of course, it is primarily looking at the shift from the salon to the studio, but even within that, the gramophone record and how drama was an important thing. So how songs from dramas get recorded on the 78 RPMs. And then, of course, the bigger transition into the talkies, into the 30s, And there are many things. For example, the talkies era, which starts in the 1930s, when sound comes to cinema in the 1930s. And soon after that, there is already the idea of song in cinema. And very soon after that, there is the idea of the playback, which comes to the record and to the cinema, and there are certain formats which have remained from then, and if you look at the kind of songs that have been recorded or which have moved into cinema, there are some very old songs which have which were recorded way before they came into cinema. So you have, for example, मोहे पन घट पे नंद लाल घेर लियो रे, मोहे पन घट पे नंद लाल घेर लियो रे. So we know this one. This came into Mughal-e-Azam. Then, of course, subsequently, so many songs. Rangi sari gulabi chunariya re. Or you have इन्हीं लोगों ने ले ली ना दुपट्टा मेरा. So these songs were not, they have also been reversioned subsequently in more recent films. And more recently you have Begum Akhtar's famous that Hamari Atariya pe, that was sung very recently by in a film which is filmed on, and the song is filmed on Madhuri Dixit. So so many transitions which happened because of the gramophone era. And apart from the fact that the women contributed to it, it's also a very important phase of documentation, of the kind of music which is otherwise a part of the oral tradition. Yeah. Sorry, you were asking me something else.
Okay. Vidya, now let's take some of the questions that are coming up. And
okay.
Since you are in the, we were discussing the women in record, there's someone, Rajiv Kumar Shukla, in the audience asking that this subject has been described in the book Ye Kothe Walia by eminent Hindi novelist Amritlal Nagarji. Did you find it useful?
That's right.
Did you find it useful? I mean, did that book help you while you were researching?
In fact, very recently, I discovered a fabulous song which is mentioned in the book, and this is, he attributes the song to a Tawaif conference which happens in the 1920s, and how the Tawaifs actually get together. And he says, I think he attributes the song to a Husna Bai, who's a very, very famous Tawaif from Banaras. And they come together and they share songs which are potentially patriotic in nature. And there's a very, very beautiful song. And if you permit me, I'll sing 2 lines from the song that is from that book. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I just need a minute to sort of.
Oh, that's perfectly fine.
देखो माइक नहीं है, साजिंदे नहीं है, तो ये सब करना पड़ेगा, रुकना पड़ेगा.
I know, and for the audience, while Vidya is fixing, let me tell you that the video from time to time may be freezing or maybe slowing down, but these are the perils of online or living online, going online, because it depends on bandwidth and other things. So please bear with us. I hope you being able to at least listen to the conversation, even though the video from time to time I know has been freezing. Yes,
sorry, the song is not Husna Bai, it's Vidyadhari Bai. Sorry. Yeah. चुन चुन के फूल ले लो, चुन चुन के फूल ले लो, अरमाए रह न जाए. चुन चुन के फूल ले लो, अरमाए रह न जाए. ये हिंद का बगीचा गुलजार रह न जाए. ये हिंद का बगीचा गुलजार रह न जाए. चुन चुन के फूल ले लो, ये वो चमन नहीं है, ये वो चमन नहीं है, लेने से वो उजाड़. उल्फत का जिसमें कुछ भी एहसान रह न जाए. उल्फत का जिसमें कुछ भी एहसान रह न जाए. चुन चुन के फूल ले लो, हिंद का बगीचा गुलजार रह न जाए. ये हिंद का बगीचा गुलजार रह न जाए. So this was actually spotted in that book, and of course, it's been musically treated by a well-known musician called Dr. Anish Pradhan. So yeah.
Thank you so much. On a different note, there was a question for you from Professor Manjushri Palit, saying that as an extension, being a woman singer, you have faced a lot of challenges. I mean, I'm not sure whether you faced or not, but someone is assuming that you faced a lot of challenges. But you know, your mother is a singer, a Carnatic singer. Your sister is a singer. You come from a family, though you chose to sing much later when you thought the time was right, because I think you studied psychology and you wanted to be that before you became a singer. Uh, they're talking about, does misogyny exist in the music world as an and as an extension to the above question, are there also casting couch and me too experience by women in music? Did you get my question, Vidya?
Tradition. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Vidya, I can hear you.
The is rather male dominated. Yeah. So the tradition itself is rather male dominated, and I don't need to go back again and again to women on record, but just to make one additional point, that the Guru Shishya Parampara that we so celebrate is usually from an Ustad to a male Shagird. And it follows a certain kind of a lineage, you know. So whether it is either the son or the son-in-law or then someone from outside, uske baad koi bai ko seekhna hai to then she has to keep appealing to the Ustad ki sikha do. This was historically how it happened. But because of the record and how that democratized the performance space, so at least till the 30s or so, there were mostly only women who came from a certain considered kind of a community who were performing. But धीरे धीरे ये समझ में आने लगा कि you don't, when you are playing a record, you're not necessarily looking at an artist. So women from other backgrounds also started feeling, who were learning otherwise, but there was no question of their performing. So, but women from these other backgrounds also started feeling tempted to go on the record. And so, you know, they did start recording. And in the initial resistance that the Ustads felt towards recording, because this was a Guru Shishya Parampara and they didn't want to sell their talim and their traditional bandishes, they suddenly realized the importance of the market, and many of them come around to recording as well, you know. So there is already a gender shift that is happening thanks to the technology, and now this then extends to the fact that, you know, more women are also coming into singing playback, for example. There are many names from the 40s, late 30s, 40s, who come into playback singing. In addition to which, there are women who are not only from the earlier kind of background, who are also coming into the acting space. Shanta Apte, for example. So there are many sort of gender transitions that are already happening because of these changes that are simultaneously going around, happening around us in the 20th century. So the point is, therefore, an artist like me does not have to necessarily carry that baggage of, you know, this kind of being of being victim to a certain kind of a misogynistic structure. But having said that, because it is primarily a male-dominated system, there is, of course, there is some resistance that one faces, and there is also a certain kind of a what can I say? A framework that defines, a female singer or a male singer. But having said that, I think a lot of that has considerably gone down because of these changes that I mentioned. In terms of a casting couch, it would be hard for me to say because I haven't faced anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are issues like that. And it's true that that there are power dynamics which women must be falling prey to, perhaps. Yeah.
There is also a power dynamic, Vidya, between different genres of music, the gharanas in the north, and of course the various genres in the south. And does the fraternity of Carnatic music, and this is a question from Sudha K, asking that does the Carnatic music fraternity accept you as a part of them, given your diversity of music?
I think this whole Carnatic North Indian thing is going to be it's an age-old problem which will remain, I think, for some time, because it's almost like sibling rivalry in a sense, that there is respect, but there's also like a bit of one-upmanship. This is better or that is better. I think the two systems have similarities, but they also have they do have market differences, and those differences need to be respected. Get there will be a little more bonhomie rather than this kind of a. Even see, can you see me, Kishla? Can you see me, Kishla?
No, Vidya, we can hear you. I think the video is getting very weak, so we are making sure that we listen to you clearly when you're
Can
when
you
you're
see me
speaking.
now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yes, there has been always this tension between Carnatic and North Indian music. But as someone who has learned both these systems, I feel that both systems bring certain characteristics which are unique to them. Although we can say that there is Yaman in North Indian music and there's Kalyani in Carnatic music, but the approaches to both kinds of both systems is quite different. And I'm sure there are scholars who have looked at it very, who have looked at it. But even for a listener to be able to make that distinction is not easy. Is not easy. Therefore, for example, when I moved from Carnatic to Hindustani, one of the challenges that I faced, in fact, the first rag that I did learn was a Bada Khayal in Yaman. And one of the challenges that I faced was how do I organize space? So in Carnatic, you have, you have a tal structure and you're giving yourself that tal structure, and it's more kriti oriented, bandish oriented. But in Khayal Gaiki, as the term suggests, Khayal, it's more about improvising. It's about letting your imagination run riot. So therefore, it's about this framework, and you have to fill that space up. So these kinds of distinctions, I think, if people will understand and therefore figure out which is the approach that they enjoy more. But having said that, I think it's really a case of sibling rivalry which will not go away for a long time.
Vidya, there's the other question from Pratyakshas. How has the recent popularization of streaming services instead of tradition of records or CDs affected the financial situation in classical musicians in particular? I think you've kind of addressed that
You've
earlier.
kind of addressed this, yeah.
Yeah. Also, Reena Mukherjee, I have worked in IPTA for many decades, and in theatre we have songs of protest, Janageet. Have you had any participation in such activities? Of course, I mean, IPTA in post-independence India played a very, very important role. I mean, even before that, but from Hemango Biswas to, huge repertoire of theatre personalities have been from IPTA. The IPTA's contribution to Indian culture has been immense. So are you also a part of that or in that lineage?
I'm really grateful to the lady that she's brought up IPTA, because one should have mentioned or discussed IPTA and their seminal contribution. I have not been a part of IPTA, but I have, of course, I've listened to some of their songs, and I have also enjoyed the the energy of these songs. But yes, the Indian People's Theatre Association has been a very, very important repertoire, have been a very, very important contribution to protest music. And a lot of the songs that, for example, Hath Kudali Re, or there are even other songs that I have as part of my repertoire when I worked in rural India briefly, where I did, engage with this kind of poetry. So IPTA is a very, very solid contributor to our understanding of progressive poetry, of protest, of movements.
Thanks, Vidya. I'm going to ask a last question to Vidya before we wrap up. But audience, if you have any other questions, please pass them on. I can put them, and of course, I'm going to ask Vidya, in the tradition of all shows that interview musicians and singers, that they wrap it up with a song. But all across the world, Vidya, during these last 2 months, people have turned to art and to music as being therapeutic, and we've seen that particularly more amplified in Italy, where people have come out from balconies in their severe lockdown, singing from Bella Ciao to all other folk songs. How folk songs really, music in a sense gives the sense of community in times of such isolation. Is there any song that comes to your mind which kind of brings a sense of community during such a severe isolation?
Well, let's see. I mean, in the sense that there are many songs which even a Hum Honge Kamyab could be something that people can sing together and enjoy the idea of it and feel relieved for those few moments when they are singing, and energized and hopeful when they are singing these songs. And I just wish that people would bother to sing more, engage more with poetry, because it can also bring you a lot of peace, even if it's momentarily. Yes. And I think I'd like to, since you're asking me if I can sing, I think I'd like to finish with Hum Dekhenge, because I think it's probably an anthem that works across all our issues and travails in today's time. So I will sing that, and it's a pity that I can't see my audience, because usually people join me when I sing Hum Dekhenge. So I'm assuming that they are singing to themselves as I'm singing with you, singing for you.
And I'll also
वो
request
दिन
the
के
audience.
जिसका वादा है हम देखेंगे, वो दिन के जिसका वादा है हम देखेंगे, जो लोहे अज़ल में लिखा है हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे। जब जुल्मों सितम के कोहे गरा, जब जुल्मों सितम के कोहे गरा, रूई की तरह उड़ जाएंगे, हम महकूमों के पांव तले, ये धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी, और अहले हुक्म के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कड़कड़ कड़केगी, हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे। बस नाम रहेगा अल्लाह का, बस नाम रहेगा अल्लाह का, जो गायब भी है हाजिर भी, जो मंजर भी है नाजिर भी, बस नाम रहेगा अल्लाह का, जो गायब भी है हाजिर भी, जो मंजर भी है नाजिर भी, उठेगा अनल हक का नारा, जो मैं भी हूँ और तुम भी हो, और राज करेगी खल्के खुदा, जो मैं भी हूँ और तुम भी हो। हम देखेंगे, लाजिम है कि हम भी देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे, हम देखेंगे।
Thank you so much, Vidya. Thank you so much. I wish and hope that very soon we will be able to again congregate and listen to live music. There is no alternative, or I don't think so. I mean, I have been on television for all my life, and which is technology. But I still feel, I think, the communion between the artist and the audience when it happens live is something which cannot be replaced by technology. There were some questions on technology as well.
उस वाह वाह के बगैर मजा नहीं आता है। I'm saying उस वाह वाह के बगैर मजा नहीं आता है।
बिल्कुल 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 तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया and thanks so much for coming, and thanks to the audience on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Next week, same time, we are going to interview a special guest, an 8-year-old Indian girl called Lysipriya, who is the world's youngest climate warrior. And given that it is the 5th is the World Environment Day, it falls on the 7th next Sunday. We are inviting Lysipriya to come and speak to you. So please join us next Sunday, 6 p.m. on One Story, One Voice. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Kishore, for inviting me. Thank you very much for making me part of this series. It's a wonderful series and keep going. Thank you.